Hello and welcome to the Temple Tankard. I am Jim, aka Argent Wind, and I am your host today for DM&D Chat, where we talk about all things D&D and how to be a dungeon master. So, before we get started, I want to say thank you for being here, and if you're watching in the future, thank you for watching. We are the House of Gamers is our Discord server, and we are always looking for more D&D players, more D&D DMs especially. But if you're also looking for a place to team up with people for MMOs of all different kinds, come on by, join our Discord, and get in on the fun. So I'm also the dungeon master for Avarice, the Shattered World, or a game that streams on Saturdays at 2 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. We've been running now for we started January 1st, so we're at the 10-month mark now. So we're moving along pretty well here with that campaign. So there are videos on our YouTube channel if you want to go back and watch previous videos and check things out there. Love to see you there. With that in mind, the DM&D chat I started as you've heard maybe before as a way to get new DMs uh, into the task, into that role, because we're always looking for more. And dungeon masters really are the stars because they drive the games, they get the people in there, they get things rolling and keep things going. And so far, episode one, we talked about world building, how to create your own world or how to flesh things out in a way that makes your world feel alive and engaging. Episode two was campaigns, getting into a narrative arc or a way to drive the story forward for your players to engage with, and ways to keep things going there. In episode three was encounters, where we got into what makes a good encounter. What's a fun, enjoyable encounter for players, because encounters are the lifeblood of the campaign. They're the chapters of the story. They're the scenes of the movie or TV show, and it's what drives the story as the players interact with the world and with the campaign. But today we're talking about people, places, and things. The elements that make up those encounters. You need to have locations. Many times you're going to have NPCs involved, and you're going to have items that are being interacted with, either as something in part of the encounter or something you might find as treasure or loot or things you need to investigate later on. So we're going to talk about how to make interesting locations, interesting NPCs, interesting items for players, and how to get around some pitfalls and traps with them as well. So first off, um, these set pieces really are what drive the interest. The more interesting your location, the more people are going to interact with it, the more people are going to feel it's alive and they can picture it in their minds. A lot of times, if you don't have a digital platform where you're showing pictures or maps, or if you're talking around a table and all you have is a flat battle mat out there for you, or maybe you don't even have that at the start of an encounter, you're going to need to paint a picture for people. Like what's gonna be the things that they stand out in their mind about a location when you first visit it. Think of the various elements that jump out at you, and not just for just the visual aspect, but how does it feel? Because just a few sentences and a few pieces of descriptive text can really get um, can really get players engaged and able to interact with that scene or that place. So some things to think about with locations. We touch on this a little bit with encounters because locations are such a pivotal part of an encounter. Almost every encounter is going to take place in a location of some kind. But the things to think about are general things like, what does a person notice first when they walk up to a house? Is the house run down with shattered windows and tattered curtains fluttering in the broken glass, missing shingles, rotted plants, and twisted dead trees in the landscaping around the building? Or is it a lively, vibrant place with flickering lights in the windows, shapes moving back and forth through those windows there, a sturdy wooden door with a big brass knocker on it, and all those kind of things that really paint that picture. You also want to think about in a location, time of day. Is it nighttime and the bright stars up in the sky and a moon casting a glow over everything? Or is it an overcast day, drizzly day, um, with just kind of a dreary look to everything. Again, they know if they're walking up to a house and it's nighttime, they're going to approach it a lot differently than they walk out during the day. So that's going to really help with it's going to really help with kind of painting that picture in their mind and how they're going to approach the situation. Sometimes um, things about like decoration and style. Again, getting the idea of when you walk into a room, is it appointed with lush furniture of dark wood and velvet coverings, paintings on the wall, um, flickering lamps and candelabras and everything else, as opposed to a bare room with a threadbare rug on the floor and a tattered couch on one side and a painting hung on the side there and a shattered window off to the side, looking out over the barren landscape outside. Again, it could be the same building, but how you describe it's going to paint a very different picture and give your players a different feel for what's going on. And also the idea of what's going to be expected in a place like that. So you walk into a richly appointed manor, you're going to expect people to be there, as opposed to that deserted, abandoned feel of that old haunted house kind of feel of the tattered, rundown place. So those those few lines of descriptive text talking about the creaky wooden floor, the cobwebs in the corner of the room, the dark, dreary feeling, the feeling of dread over the place, the dissonant whispers off somewhere in the building that you can't quite place a direction for, the sounds of footsteps echoing through the hallway as a guard walks into view. All these things really paint that picture in their minds and give a person a chance to figure out what they're going to do, and clue them in for a place. Um, Maps and pictures are definitely a plus. If you have a picture that you can paint, or you can have a picture that you can display of a building or a room, that's going to be a huge plus. But it's not absolutely necessary. Again, with some just descriptive lines, descriptive pieces of information, it will help paint a picture in their minds and give them idea what's going to be there. Um, and putting up a map, um, that's going to make the player think there's going to be combat. The second that map appears, the players are going to be thinking fight time. And so you may not want to do that, or you might ramp up the tension by putting them on a map and slowly moving things into place. And when's it going to happen? When's the monster going to appear? When are the guards going to run in? Any of those things can kind of help in that aspect. But it's kind of a double-edged sword sometimes, as a map or a picture doesn't give you the imagination you can deal with. So either way you go, um, can be helpful, beneficial, toward drawing the players in. So you kind of use the tools, whatever tools you have at your disposal, but use them all if you can. Um, for location, some things to consider is, if you are thinking of a fight taking place here or some interesting things to find, think three dimensions. So when you walk into a room, it isn't just about what's there. It's what's up in the ceiling. Is there a second story? Is there a balcony looking down over the place? Is there a cordoned off area? Where are the doors, the exits for the room? All of these things are getting the players thinking about not just what's here, but what's beyond, and drive and kind of like helps drive an encounter toward exploration or discovery. So all of those kind of things really help liven the location, as there's more to do and more to interact with. Think about dynamics. A house is often just, especially if there's other people inside of it, or maybe enemies or monsters or undead or whatever is roaming around the house, there are things happening other places in the house. So having sounds that catch someone's attention, having something walk by, having lights go on or off, any of those things. And again, if it's a populated place, like you're in a tavern, people are doing things, have conversations rise up, have a fight break out between a couple of patrons over here, or people playing cards, or bartender serving drinks to people over here. All of those things make the scene more dynamic and feel more alive for the players as well. So again, don't just think about what's happening right now around the players. They're not in a bubble. There's all kinds of things around the room and around the location that will be something that they can engage with. So, so your locations can become more a part of the story in that case. And whether it's an indoor location, outdoor locations, the scenes walking through a forest or through a desert at night into a cave, all of these things have different elements they can really bring in a liveliness to the scene that might not be there otherwise. So keep in mind the things that can be out there. And it doesn't hurt if it doesn't hurt to look at a picture for reference for yourself. If you're as you're kind of prepping an idea, if you're prepping ahead of time for a location, look at a scene, look at a map, get an idea of what's there, or think about like TV shows or movies or even books that you've read where you've pictured things in your mind. How do you get that point across to the players? And maybe they'll picture the same thing that um that you're thinking of. And it goes a long ways toward getting the players engaged. Something else to think of is what in the room or what in the location or what in the area that the players are in can be used as a prop. If they have trees, they can climb trees and do things. If they're in a modern day setting, if you're in an office building, you might have desks to hide behind, chairs to throw across the room. In an office building, there may be a fire extinguisher on the wall you can use in some way. All these things add to more dynamic, interesting things for the players to do. There's a Whenever I walk into a building for the first time, especially one with a lot of like multiple floors and stairways and all that, I immediately think of action movies, like Jackie Chan movies or something like that, where I'm thinking, oh, that'd be a fun little stunt to jump from over there to there, or throw things down on someone from here, or and as a DM, it's a great way to think about future encounters, future things for your players to go through. Look at a real world setting and think, ooh, this is kind of a cool idea. If I had something like this and I can describe something like this, the players may be able to do some fun things in this kind of location. So again, the locations can be dynamic, they can be multi-dimensional, a lot of props around. The more there is, the more the players can have a great time in the space. And with that in mind, even if you don't describe it, if you talk about like a tavern and a player says, "Hey, I want to grab a bottle off the table and throw it across this person," or "I want to take this chair and push it across and trip this guy as he's walking by." Those kind of things are reasonable things to have in that scene. And so you want to reward those players for coming up with those ideas. So if they say, "Hey, I want to do this thing," don't just say, "Oh no, there's nothing there. Oh, that doesn't exist." Or no, let the players drive that. If they say, "Hey, I want to run over here," is there and if they say, is there this?" 9 times out of 10, really, you want to think of, yeah, sure there is. Go for it. Do something cool with it. So again, that location can really come to life for the players to do whatever they want in. It's a play space for them. So moving on from locations to people, to our NPCs. In the same way that locations are need to have life, need to have a way to picture them, your NPC should as well. And it doesn't just like you don't need to just give a name and a history and a background. Just something when a person walks up to you, what do they see? Well, they're going to notice like hair color, maybe eye color if they're close enough, the type of clothing they're wearing, how clean it is, what style it is. Obviously, what race they are in a fantasy setting. A dwarf looks going to be a very different image in the mind from an elf or a half orc, or a human for that matter. So all those things, walking up to a person and saying, "Oh, you see a broad-shouldered dwarf with a long, messy beard, hair slicked back, kind of receding, dark, ruddy skin from being outside too much, clothing is kind of worn and dirty, has sort of look of a laborer to them, or someone who works in the if you're in a city, someone who might work at the docks or in a warehouse or something." Um, as opposed to seeing a well-dressed noble human in finery with embroidered trim, with a very stylish long hair pulled back, a neatly trimmed beard. All of these kind of elements paint a very different picture for those people. And if they're interacting with them, think about mannerisms. Think about what that person is and try to vary it up. There's nothing more annoying than seeing the same person over and over and over again, unless there's a running gag around that based around something like that. But that's a different idea. But the idea of if everybody you meet on the street or meet in a town or meet in a bar is a jerk or not helpful, it's going to discourage the players from interacting with the NPCs in your world. So vary it up. You might have someone who's kind of a gruff jerk one time, and the next guy they run into is a very arrogant, boastful person, and this person is well very helpful and maybe timid and shy. And all of these things can liven up the world for your players to interact with these people. In terms of shopkeepers, you might have that gruff jerk of a shopkeeper that, what do you want? Fine, you're back again. You want the same thing you got last time? Great, here you go. And so, but the thing is, if you use that shopkeeper and he's a gruff jerk, but he remembers them and gets them the things that they asked for previously, it starts to build a relationship and they may go back to that person because, hey, let's go see Joe at the general store. Get some more of that ale we got last time. Again, you've now made a connection to your world that might not have been there if you just said, yeah, guy behind the shopkeeper asked what you want. And yeah, it's 5 gold for all the stuff you want here. Let's move on to the next encounter. Oh, and you also walk out the shop. Well, that interaction suddenly didn't matter. And that may be the case. Not every interaction has to be a crazy dynamic role playing session. But the more of those you have, the more alive your world will feel. Um, and this gives me a little sidebar here with voices. One thing you just heard me do there was I just took my normal voice and made it gruff, talking like this all of a sudden. I didn't change the pitch of my voice. I didn't change my accent. I just changed the way my tone was. So in terms of voices, I am by no means a voice actor at all. I've practiced a lot and played around with a lot of things, and I've watched some videos out there. And if you are looking for video tutorials, there are a ton of them on YouTube to go out there, find tips and tricks from professional voice actors, how to do accents, how to do voices. But on the base level of it, try not to be yourself. If I'm talking to you like this as a narrative and suddenly become the shopkeeper who says, "Okay, what would you like to what would you like today?" Well, it's hard to tell where I stopped being the DM and started being the NPC. At the very least, pause, change your posture, your mannerisms, and your voice slightly. So if I'm talking to you right now and say, okay, you walk into a shop, there's all kinds of barrels and venturing equipment and foodstuffs and dried meats and everything else on counters all the place there, and you stop to look at the shopkeeper. What can I help you with today? And so I would like to see how I can help you in some way. Or maybe you want some dried meats or some wine. And so you see, I've suddenly engaged by taking on a different aspect of um, who who I am for the players. And then if you want to change the voice, you can drop your voice a little bit lower and speak softly. You can speak a little bit faster and talk a little quicker, or you can go in with a little bit of a more of a nasal tone, like, well, what do you want today? I don't know. Or talk that gruff voice of like, oh, I don't care what you want to stop in and do whatever. Um, Again, I'm not using any accents. I'm just changing the pitch and style of my voice. And you can go a long way with just those little changes. And again, it makes those NPCs come alive for the players. Um, it doesn't hurt to have a picture again. If you can go online and find a picture of someone that kind of is matches your idea for somebody, or you go through and just do fantasy dwarven shopkeeper, and you might find like a dozen or so, and find one and just put it up on the screen so they can see it's like that, and then add a voice and whatever else. That can go a long ways toward helping your players too, at least picturing them in your minds. But it isn't necessary in every single case. You don't need to do that for every single person they come across. It's just something as a tool it can be used to help with your NPCs, especially your villains or your BBEGs or whatever you're going to have out there. Monologues are tricky. Sometimes players aren't going to let them get a chance to deliver that dastardly speech about their plans and how the heroes are never going to be able to succeed. Try to keep them short. Don't overscript. Don't expect someone to deliver a huge speech. Have some talking points, have some ideas in your mind of what this person might say if they're questioned. But if you try to get too deep into like, well, this is their script, it's going to feel fake because you're going to be reading a script literally. And unless you're a professional actor, it's harder to deliver that in a way that doesn't sound like you're just reading lines. Um, for general guys, for general mooks, or just your everyday person, think of catchphrases. What are they? What does a bartender say when you walk in? Hey, what can I get you? Oh, you close the door. You're letting the draft in. Whatever it might be, have some things that you might consider when someone's meeting of someone for the first time. A catchphrase or just a line or two of dialogue that they might use in a situation you expect them to be in. So again, those people can come to life with that. Okay. So moving on from people, let's talk about the things. Items. The most common items you're going to have in a D&D game is going to be treasure. Usually loot of some kind, items you found, weapons and armor. And not everything has to be something great or outstanding. Your average bandit's going to be running around with a basic short sword and maybe a short bow and some leather armor. Nothing really special. But the guy in charge of them might have something interesting, might have a longbow instead that has a sighting mechanism that gives him +1 to hit. Not magical, not game breaking, but there's a something there that might be a little bit more valuable if they want to sell it, or if it's something somebody in the party might want to use, it's there. Think of minor magic items, things that do just little things, um, like giving a +2 bonus to history checks because it helps you recall information that you've read in books. Um, Again, not game breaking, but a little bonus that might be something that comes in handy. And it's something that players are kind of, I say, this is kind of cool. I found this cool thing that gives me a boost to something. Um, Try to avoid your items being overly descriptive. I mean, no one wants, I mean, you don't need to go into huge detail about what something is right off the bat, but enough to kind of give, again, the general characteristics. Talking about a sword, long sword, silvery metal, runes across the blade, and a gemstone in the pommel, maybe a blue gemstone in the pommel. What do the runes say? Well, now you start having to think about things like, well, the sword is um, the foe of all, the foe of any evil doer, whatever. Um, just and it might not even be magical. It's just something that somebody etched on their sword. It could be something more like a holy type item. So again, the items can come to life by just a couple of characteristics. Having a short sword is a plain metal short sword, or having a short sword with a leather grip and a small emerald chip in the pommel, and some notches in the blade that not sure how they got there. Again, it's better than just a plain old short sword. So think about some things that make an item interesting. And again, not every item has to be interesting, just some of them to kind of give those players the idea that they found something cool. Um, so, getting into magic items, one trap I know a lot of DMs, and I've done this too in the past, and I'm trying to avoid this now, is getting items that are too powerful too early on in the campaign. When suddenly, like, you have this idea that, hey, here's this cool bad guy, and he's going to have this item that's really neat. And now the players defeated him, and now the players have it. And now it's kind of breaking my game because a bad guy was supposed to have this good thing, but now the players do, and it's just too powerful. So what you might consider is having items that gradually get better. And there's a various systems for doing this out there. Um, so mechanics of ways of improving an item, either through some sort of arcane means, or if it's a normal item, like but giving them a chance to make those items sharper to do more damage, or better balance to get bonus to hit. In my world, I call this augmentations. non-magical enhancements to items that give it a little bit of a boost without being a new magic item. It's a lot cheaper than magic items and doesn't require full investiture of magic, of arcane power and runes and divine magics and everything else you need to make a magic item. Um, but you have this way of augmenting items and make it so they can improve those things over time. Then if they find that plus one sword, well, there are certain creatures that can only be hurt by magic weapons. So now that's a good backup maybe to the item they have augmented. And so you have these other options available to them. Um, but again, the idea of having items grow with them. There's an amazing resource out there called Ancestral Weapons, and you can find it online. But the idea of that it's a weapon that's been in your family, and it can the idea is that it levels up with you over time. You get more abilities, and the abilities might be key to how the player uses it or the fighting style they use as the weapon becomes more and more attuned to them. Not just the D&D attunement, but the idea that the item gets better because the player uses it and because they form a connection with it. And so those ancestral weapons or weapons like that, where they get more powerful over time. Another example of this is in Critical Role, the vestiges of divergence. I trip over that every time. Vestiges of divergence, where they have different power levels based on, and they have different ways of getting those power levels. Your basic level, your exalted level, whatever the items are there, but you have different power levels of the item that you unlock through different things that happen in the story. Like defeating a dragon might unlock the next ability for the item, or defeating some other foe, or using something in a creative way, or just over time, it just improves as it becomes more attuned to you, and you unlock its power. So that way, you're not just like, here, have this artifact. It's here's this sword. There's something more to it. Oh, well, let's find out over time. And then suddenly, at some heroic moment in the story, you strike down this lich, and suddenly the weapon glows, and you feel the surge of power, and you realize it's now an undead bane sword. It gives off radiant energy, and it's meant to slay undead. And you now have this cooler weapon that you did something cool to get. So again, so there's a lot of story potential in there, but also it isn't just a basic boring item. And at the very least, if they have those basic items, give them ways to sell them off and find better stuff, or ways to transfer that into another item, or augment the things that they have that they want to keep with those powers they get from items that don't help them. So just thinking of ways to make items more unique, more make them grow with the player and make them more interesting overall. Um, there are a lot of resources out there, from Griffin Saddlebag to various creators on the internet with really cool magic items and with pictures and everything else. If you can, especially in an in-person game, having little like index cards or art cards or something that shows the picture of it and has the little items in there, that can be a really cool thing to give someone, saying, "Hey, you found this." And it has the stats and everything else. I think, wow, that's kind of cool. And so you tuck it away and keep it there. In terms of working on a digital platform, building the item in D&D Beyond and attaching an image and putting on their character sheet and helping the players like, hey, you found this thing. Look on your sheet now. Oh, wow, that's really cool. And if you have especially if you have an image attached to it, even better. So think about some ways to present the items and ways to get those to the players so that it becomes a lot more interesting and a lot more fun. Um, think about those items that have legends surrounding them, like a fabled sword or a fabled set of armor or a ring used by this archmage in the past, or these strange coins that give out powers to someone but may have a little price attached to them. Who knows? Um, uh, but having these things seated in the game there that can pop up there, become a part of the story, part of the world building, and the players get to interact with them. Kind of a trifecta of fun things to make your world come alive and make your game more interesting and more dynamic. Um, I'm gonna a couple more things to say here, but before I do, I just want to remind you that there is about a 10 to 15 second delay between what I'm saying right now and what comes up in the chat. So when I ask for questions, um, uh, start dropping them in there now as I'm wrapping up here, because that would be just go right into them. I don't have to wait for people to um, drop them in there. So as you think of them, throw them in there. We'll start getting the questions here in just a minute here. Um, and so to kind of sum up the people, places, and things are things here. Again, these are all set pieces toward making your encounters more alive, making your world more alive, and bringing your players into the story in ways that may not be there if you don't put some thought into it. If you don't give a little bit more, just just a little more time and thought to what you're giving, what you're putting forth for the players there. It doesn't need to be a lot. Like I said, you don't need a half page description. You don't need tons of maps and diagrams and pictures and all sorts of there, but just enough to paint a picture, just enough to give life to something that might be kind of dull otherwise. Let the players interact with those things and see what they're like. All right. So I do have a couple. Do couple questions come in here. And so I'm going to start jumping into those, but you have more. Keep dropping them in there. First off, you have Aaron here with what makes it interesting and substantial NPC. Again, it's that dynamic. So if you get to interact with a player more than once, especially, and they grow and change or form connections with the party, that's what's going to make it interesting NPC for the players. Now, it may be they just meet them, find out some information, move on. In the case of bad guys, they might meet them and kill them and move on. But at least having something interesting for the players to interact with, to speak with. And if you have ways of those bad guys that you craft, have ways for them to get away, to escape, or to come back and become recurring villains, that's a really fun thing to do. It can be frustrating for the players, but it also, again, makes the world feel alive that now that there's this character who's going to come back at some point, or maybe they don't, and there's always this threat that they might. Or the players might start looking at things and going, hey, is it that guy that did this? Nope, he's another part of the world now. They don't know that, but you might say, maybe they will, maybe they won't. Maybe somebody else is being a copycat. So again, all these fun little ideas of how to make those NPCs again more interesting and more substantial to the story and to what's going on. Um, and what makes cities and areas engaging. Uh, to take like the idea of a building or a location and go to a city, um, think about the style of the city. Is it a small ramshackle village with a couple of huts and uh, a terrible smell, or is it a vibrant, multi-tiered buildings, 10-story buildings and flying airships and people moving across sky bridges and large rivers with boats and barges, and all of these things go toward making a city more interesting. Even the small ones can have some ideas of, well, the people make it interesting, or this one temple makes it interesting, or this idea of having this town with a substantial thieves guild in it. That's where it comes. Uh, that's where it kind of comes into what makes that town different from others, what makes it kind of fun, or for players to either engage with and really delve into, or avoid, or go in thinking we need to raise this place to the ground. So again, that's sort of and then to take that to a larger area, what makes the land surrounding it? What makes the country different? Is it the government? Is it the military? Is it the proximity of enemies around it? Or all of these things make an area more interesting. And it's something that kind of grows over time. You don't need to do it right away, but let it build. And as you think of ideas, bring them in and have them matter. So I hope that helps a little bit with that question there. Um, Green Dragon, another good resource is to look for older editions of D&D and or even Pathfinder, inspiration for cool magic items. Exactly. There's a ton of stuff to find in older information. Um, and I mean, I still use my old first edition or advanced Dungeons and Dragons ideas for magic items and things. A lot of them have been translated over time, But there are things like certain spells or certain items or things like that that come up from other editions or other things there that are great places to bring them in. I know I've known some people and one very famous DM on thing there that uses abilities and items from fourth edition and brings them in as players because they're kind of like charged items that they can only use a certain amount of times. They kind of work really well for fifth edition. The idea of having things that only work once per short rest or once per battle or once per whatever. Um, and having these cool things that they can do or use based off the items they have. Not a bad way to go either. So yeah, exactly. Other resources, other editions, other systems. Sometimes even if you can translate those, that's a great way to go. Um, so think about a campaign where everyone has an ancestral weapon. You think it devalues the concept. Should it only be one or two characters per campaign? It really kind of comes down to the style of the campaign. It might be interesting to have a party of second generation or second or third generation adventurers that all have famous adventurers, or they're people that were apprenticed to um, retired adventurers who are now going and striking out on their own, and they might have an item that was passed down to them saying, "Hey, someday this may do something for you," and the idea of how they get better or how they improve might be different based on the item or the character or who their mentor was or their parent was. So there could be some fun ways to go with ancestral weapons on that way. And we say ancestral, there are also the idea that some items can be improved, like intentionally. You might have an item that says, like, well, it has this. How do I make it better? Because I really like the fact that I have this really cool rapier with a it's got a blood red metal for the blade and this crazy twisted spiked hand guard. But it's a plus one rapier. So you might want to find ways of how do I make this thing better? And so finding something in the campaign or some NPCs that can help improve it for you, um, or finding ways that you can tap into developing abilities with that item. It may not even be something magical. It might be something along the lines of, well, I've had this thing for a while. I'm now better at doing certain things with it. So giving someone like a cool pole arm, and they've learned how to trip people with it. And they can do something similar to a battle master's trip maneuver or something like that without the extra thing, maybe once per turn or once per short rest or whatever, where they can try this maneuver with the weapon and maybe get better with it over time. So it may not be that the weapon itself is getting better, it's that the player is getting better at using it or using it in creative ways. So again, the fun thing about that is you're going to then bring in potentially NPCs that might help train them in those techniques, or bring in those arcane, crazy spellcasters or artificers that have ways of helping them improve things magically or anything else like that. Or they're talking to a priest at a temple or shrine. It's helping them tap into divine magics if they're like a paladin or something like that. So the idea that it doesn't all have to be the same kind of thing where it's an ancestral weapon handed down from their forefather, but the idea that an item that they really like can grow and change and get better, and it becomes part of the story. It does become a balancing act where you don't want to get too powerful too fast, but over times it can be something they can prove and work toward, and you kind of get a feel for the pacing and saying, hey, giving them this maneuver once per battle isn't going to break the game. It's going to be fun little things they can do. Um, and then maybe they stop doing it after a while, or maybe it only happens when they roll a 20, when they roll 19 or 20 on the die roll, they can do this cool maneuver with it. Again, there are different ways of going about doing that. And so you don't have to limit it to one or two characters, but giving all the characters an option to having cool abilities that set them apart from others based on their gear or their special training, that can go a long ways toward making people feel more unique and more cool. Um, how do you introduce new places you essentially made up and make it seem like it fits in the world? Question. Um, when you're thinking about your world, you have the idea of world building. You know kind of what's there. And so it's think of it this way is there's a certain logic to what's in the world. Um, you don't suddenly do like, well, you walk from one town to the next, and this town is very much like a English countryside village. Next town you walk into has a Middle Eastern Cairo feel. Doesn't really make sense to go from one place to the other. Having similarities because they're in the same country in the same region are what's going to make it feel like it fits. And having people and places and styles of things that fit. But the idea of like, hey, they go to a whole new place. Well, now what's different about this new place? Maybe they go off to this other country on the other side of the mountains, this other part of the world, where now it makes sense to have something new and different. So the idea of a new place, it depends on proximity to other places they've been to. So the idea of going from this big city to a small town to another country, you're going to see differences based on how close they are and what the population is. Again, you go from a human centric city to a farm village where it's mostly made up of halflings. You're going to have a very different feel from one place to the other. And it will feel like it fits in the world because you find things that make sense. If suddenly you go someplace and the magic level is completely different and the style of architecture is totally different and the population is completely different, makeup and everything else, people are going to say, well, why did that happen or what brought that about? Now, the fun thing is there could be a reason why there is, and that may be part of what they discover and learn about the place. But it isn't something that's going to be like, it doesn't fit. It becomes more an issue of like, why doesn't this fit? Or what what causes this to be different from that? And so as you bring in new places that you're just making up, again, you're making it up. As you're building it, think of ways it fits. And if it doesn't, that can be part of the story. Hope that makes sense there. Um, so again, you're making up most of what's here. Now, in obviously in a campaign setting, in a pre-made campaign setting, it's going to be pretty well laid out, and it's going to kind of flow from one place to the next. But I've seen ones where it's like you go from a very, again, European, like very English countryside um, style to suddenly Cairo to Japan to, and they're all like within 50 miles of each other. It's like what from one trip to another. If you want to do something like that, where you introduce a vastly different society or style of things, put some space between it. Put some either landmarks or travel time from one to the other that makes that difference make sense. Hope that answers the question there. And kind of caught up with the question for the moment here. Um, but it does bring up, I had a question from somebody else recently. I'm not sure if he's out there listening right now, but I wanted to touch on a little bit there because I think it's going to be something that we're going to do in a little more detail in a future episode. The idea of magic. And I touched on this a little bit with items, but the idea of how much magic plays a role in your setting. And it comes down to the style of your world. Like some places, like right now in Avarice, at the time period they are, people have Manatech devices in their home, like stoves or lights or heating or cleaning devices that are literally magic driven items that people just have in their house. They have a clean box where they drop things in there, press a button, and thing turns clean. They can put it away. They might have Manatech lights with just to do dancing lights or the light cantrip. They can just turn these things on and have light in their houses. They can be able to heat food or cool things off, or with prestidigitation plates that do like heating and cooling plates. These kind of things really become part of your world, or is it the inverse and magic is really scarce and it's like scared people are scared of it and like the idea of producing a light from your hand might get you burned at the stake or driven out of town or shot at or stoned or something like that in different settings there. So again, the magic becomes part of the world building. And so the level of magic, and we talked about this with the world building, a little bit in the world building thing here, but the idea is that in your items, it should reflect this. If magic is rare, have more things like the augmented items that have non-magical improvements. That way that they can get better things that don't require you to hand out a magic sword or that flaming sword or that uh, armor resistance or the rings of protection or boots of elvenkind. But ways of saying, okay, my armor is well made and muffled that basically counteracts the stealth penalty that would normally impart. Or it's my leather armor that's even more muffled and all the joints are cushioned and velvet lined and everything else so that it makes no noise as I move. And padded shoes and dark cloaks and those kind of things become non-magical augmentations that give them bonuses without becoming magical items. So again, those items can kind of go from one extreme to the other because I will say it's not very fun. I've been in campaigns where you get nothing. You get no cool items. Everyone has stock normal stuff. You don't get cool abilities. You level up super slow. Those kind of games kind of become a slog after a while, unless the story is really, really good. And there's a good reason for all of that. But it's something to keep in mind. It's the drive for loot. Um, the drive for loot, the drive for those cool items and money and everything else that becomes more of the focus of the game sometimes, unless you got to work out balances there. One-use items are a great way to reward players, causing long-term balancing headaches for the future. I agree, uh, but I will say this: one-use items often get forgotten about. Um, Things like healing. I have players who've never used a healing potion in my game. They've needed it, but they've never used it. And they forget they even have it. And so they're in trouble. And like, oh yeah, healing potions. We do have some of those, don't we? Or those cool things they kind of stuck on their character sheet and forget about. Um, So, but yeah, but I agree absolutely. One use that the Qual's feather tokens are a great way. Most potions, scrolls in some games, are great ways of giving something that's a bonus thing, or things that have like limited number of charges that don't recharge over time. Those go a long ways too. Um, so exactly, one use items are a really fun way of getting new cool things. Although the problem you run into sometimes is that players will hoard them because they want to like, no, it's only going to work one time, so I'm not going to use it. I'm going to hold on to it until I absolutely have to have it. And then they never use them ever because it just sits there. It's kind of like the inspiration people have sometimes. They forget to use their inspiration because they only have one, so it might not be there later on. Those finite resources get hoarded instead of used. And so if you have too much in the way of one-use items, players tend to get really paranoid about hoarding them and saving them for that rainy day. But you're right though. It's also is a great way to get some fun stuff out there. But if you find players that run into the problem of not wanting to use them, it can kind of backfire in some ways. But um, again, encourage them to use it. Um, so, very good point there. Thank you. Um, Aaron, how do you make a character's origin place, like their home, make them feel like it's really there? Um, a good trick for this is having them build it partially. So the idea of the basics of some simple questions like how big is your home? What's the population like? What do they do there? Is it a farming village? Is it a city? Is it a seedy place? Is it a village up tucked into the mountains? So getting some general ideas of what they're thinking, and before they get too much into the weeds of like, well, it has this. Some of those things may not fit in your world. Working with them to build it into there so the character's origin kind of seamlessly fits into a place. I don't know anyone who builds a world that is so cluttered that you can't find some place to tuck in a village to almost any environment. They want a mountain town, here's a mountain range over here. They want to be in a thick forest, here's one here. Coastal village, all this coastline over here. So work with the player to kind of see what they have in mind and then build it up. And if there's a chance that they can go there, now if they ever get a chance to go there in your game, I'm hoping this happens, but it depends on the player's origin where they're from. Um, the idea that before you actually go there with the characters, pull that player aside and saying, "Hey, what's the name of the tavern that's there? How many inns are there? Are there two? Are there three? How what's the best one in town? Um, who are a couple of important people in town?" And so get that player to go in there. And then the cool thing is when you go into the town, that player can then become tour guide. So you literally go, "Hey, that's that place over there. Hey, that's that place over there. Oh, look, there's Farmer Joe over there. He's the one who basically taught me how to swing an axe and how to cut down trees." Um, Again, so now you not only have a place that fits and makes it more fitting for your world, it gives that player investment and buy-in into this new place that you can go and check things out. Um, so I hope that helps out there. I like to hand out 3 by 5 cards with the name of the one use item. Oh, that's actually if final players remind them to use the one use items. That's a great way to go. If you have individual cards, um, uh, the idea of like here's your items, and then when they use them, you just take the card back. It also I've seen things. I've seen people use the healing potion bottles with the actual D4s in them. They uncork them and dump out the dice there and roll the healing dice. Um, those are great ways too there. So anything you can do to give an item that they can exchange, that could be a fun thing too. So that, especially for those one use items, they're saying, "Oh, what do I have? What do I have? Oh yeah, here you go. I'm going to use this potion here, and or I'm going to use this feather token, or I'm going to use this bead of force." That's a whole story. I may impart sometime here an encounter that went a totally different way because I forgot they had a bead of force and did some really cool things with it. You know what? So one more comment here, and I might take a minute for that story. Um, Getting players to flesh out their homes is always fun and really helps immerse them into the story narrative with the party and when the party gets good. Exactly. So again, the hometowns, if you have a chance to make people go there, um, it is a great way to make people again part of the story, part of the world. And at the very least, having things from their home become important, or having things part of their backstory become important. They're NPCs that show up, NPCs that matter to what's going on, that are part of their backstory, is again a great way to see to bring the player into the story, into the world, in a way that they may not have otherwise. Uh, uh, yeah, the healing potions are really cool, but very bulky for the traveling DM. Yes, space can if in an in-person game, space can be an issue. So index cards are a great way to go because you have a whole stack of them in a little case. Not a big deal. But yeah, exactly. So ways that you can do some fun things there. I know originally in Dungeons and Dragons, wands didn't recharge. You know, finite number of charges in them. That may be something you want to go with in your game. If you want to just say, "Hey, here's this cool thing, but it only has 5 charges in it," and then it's gone. It isn't a one-use item, but it's a limited use item. So something like that. I think D&D got a little bit too forgiving with the wands that come back there. Wand of fireballs. Um, it's a little too much that it keeps recharging over and over. You have this extra fireball in your pocket, especially one that can be upcast. We just ran into that where they're upcast, I think, to level 8, and that was rough. um, but it's something that can be part of the game there. And don't forget, items can get broken, items can get stolen, items can get disenchanted. It's a possibility. So something that might be something in your world there. If something is a problem, find a way to take it away. Find a way to, maybe it's temporarily, they get stolen for a while and they eventually find it. These are things that can happen in the game there. If something does become a problem there, or something within that powerful item they have, there's a curse that takes effect after a certain amount of time. And now it becomes a problem that has to be dealt with. Again, story, mechanics, solutions, they all go hand in hand. Um, Time for a couple more questions if you have any out there. And while I'm waiting for another question here, so the story was, and in my current campaign, they're dealing with Slod, and I ran a similar storylines in a previous campaign in my first version of Avarice, and the party had gotten a couple of beads of force, and beads of force are these little marble sized things you throw someone there, and it explodes, and they get encased in a force wall, a force bubble for like a minute or whatever it is, or whatever the time limit was there. It may be an hour actually. I can't remember. I need to look it up again there. But anyway, they're stuck in this bubble, and while they're in this bubble, they can't get out. Magic can't get in. They're basically weightless. And so they did this thing where they took the first slod they ran into, big nasty blue slod. They hit it with a bead of force, boom, bubble. Then they went, okay, we got time. What can we do? So they basically, with the wizard with the super eye intelligence, went, I got an idea. I'm gonna put this bead of force, pick it up because it weighs nothing, and then when the time is just about to run out, I'm gonna thunder wave and orient it so it's up. And me being the physics brain that I am, thinking, okay, this thing's basically weightless, and you're gonna thunder wave that knocks a full size person back 15 feet. What's this gonna do? And so I went, well, it's going to launch this thing up into the sky. Like, so I made him make a skill check, an intelligence check there to see if they could get their trajectory right. And the whole thing was it basically launched it up to the point where it was going to fall down and take the full falling damage. So as it flew up into the air, the bubble went boop, and the thing started to fall. And maximum falling damage in D&D is 20d6. So it splats into the ground, taking 20d6 damage, which is a ton of damage. I mean, an average of 60 something damage on something that has maybe 100 hit points. And then they just basically, as soon as it hit the ground, they just unloaded on it all at once and just basically took it out before it could get up. So problem solved, one use item. There we go. So um it's I hadn't even considered it, but there it is. And there's always people who want to do fun things with portable holes and bags of holding and getting rid of things that way. There's interesting ways of using items sometimes that you don't always think of, but the players, when they do, you got to award them for it. You got to let them do it. So um, I hope that's something you got to think of down the road here. Is that again, those one use items can do some fun things when they get around to using them. Um, All right. Well, I'm not seeing any other questions come up here yet, so we're going to go ahead and wrap things up. I want to thank you guys for being here, asking some questions here in the chat. If you have questions that come up in your mind here, drop them in the comment section of the video, or if you're on our Discord servers, send them to me via DMs or through our our D&D chat that's in our Discord server, or if you're or in general chat or any place that tag me if you want to, and I'll definitely jump in and help out there. And again, if you are thinking of being a dungeon master, even if you want to do a one shot, drop on a Discord server, get in the D&D campaign section, check in with me or some other of our leadership folks here, and we'll help you get up a campaign, get you on a campaign there and help you advertise for a one shot, line up some players, and give it a try. I guarantee it's going to be a fun time for everyone. I've very rarely been in games where we didn't have a bunch of laughs. Even some of the worst run games I've ever been in we still had a good time because we were playing a story, we were together doing fun things, and so and the only way to get better about being a dungeon master is to keep doing it, is to try it and keep going. So I hope that you will join us as more dungeon masters. I mean, more games, more chances for people to play. Like I would love to be a player in people's games if we can find the right time period. So again, uh, you're doing great work, and I hope you can join us. And if not, then keep listening in there until you find some inspiration. Keep asking these questions, joining us, and I hope that we'll meet you again soon here. Our next episode, we are planning. I'm planning to do something. Planning to do keeping it going, the idea of keeping a campaign moving along, dealing with setbacks like players leaving or wanting to change characters or those kind of things. It can kind of derail a campaign or make it difficult to keep going. Finding inspiration sometimes. So our next episode will be keeping it going next Thursday, 5:30. And again, if you're interested in watching some games, we have our Saturday game, our Sunday game, and for the Discord server, you can listen in on our Friday and Monday games. So hopefully we'll see you again there real soon. And thanks for being here, and let's get ready to run. Okay, take care. Bye.